All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to share my screen. So this is March 2022. We're talking in terms of Scouts BSA. We are talking about youth member retention. We're going to dive pretty deep. And like I said, I'll say it again. Last month, we talked about recruitment. I went in great detail. I want this to be a bit more of a conversation. So please feel free to stop me if there's something that doesn't make sense or you want clarity on, or if you have a different perspective. I do want to hear that. You know, let's leave the long stories towards the end. I'll make sure there's time to talk amongst ourselves at the end, but I kind of want to get through. There's about 17 different slides here, and a lot of them, some of them are like this, just kind of, you know, an idea and a graphic for me to riff on a little bit and pontificate on how I see things. And hopefully this will resonate with you and your unit and, you know, the challenges that we have in keeping our scouts, especially that first 8 to 12 months after they join. You know, usually, it's in my experience, once they've been in for a while, they settle in, you know, they do pretty well. And we have an attrition rate to a certain degree, but that crossover point from Cub Scouts, or if you have somebody come in who's not already registered, it can be a challenge. So I want to first, like I did last month, kind of go over some learning objectives. I want to do this in 3 parts. Let's talk about when you're bringing in new youth from a Cub Scout pack. So crossover, bridging, whatever you call it. There are a specific set of challenges with the transition from being a Cub Scout to a Scouts BSA troop member. I've been through it. It's been 35 years since I did that, and I remember it distinctly. It was interesting. It was stressful a little bit. I'll talk about that. And there's a specific set of things I think as troops we can do to make sure that we are facilitating those scouts having the best chance of success for those first 12 months or so, right? So I want to start with that, and then I want to transition to, because I kind of broke it down this way last month in recruitment, I want to talk about new members you might get that are not currently registered with Scouts BSA. And this could be a friend of a current scout or somebody that just decided, I want to be a scout today, and they're 12 or something, and so they join your troop, which is great. But there's a slightly different set of challenges. I'm going to come back around on that and say that the challenges as you list them are the same, but the way that we go about doing it to be successful, I think, is a little bit different, right? Then I want to take a step back, again, similar to what I did last month, and kind of go with best practices. What are some overall things we can do, you know, regardless of where the scouts come from, and all of that stuff, to make sure that we're doing the best we can to serve them. What are we not covering today? I did this last month too, I know, and I'm going to paint a wide brush here. We talked about recruitment into Scouts BSA troops last month, so we're going to set that aside. If you missed that, I sent out a link to the video. I know it's an hour long. I'm sorry, but it took that long to get through it. And I think we covered a lot of really good material. So I encourage everyone to go watch that if you haven't. After this is fine. We're not going to talk about Cub Scout recruitment and or retention. That's an entirely different conversation. We're going to focus on troops, of course. You're all troop volunteers, so that makes sense. We're not going to talk about adult volunteer, whether it's recruiting, retention of those adult volunteers. Again, that's an entirely different conversation. I want to focus on the youth, and I also don't want to point fingers, assign blame, you know, dig into the root cause for one particular troop's retention, why Tommy Tenderfoot didn't stick around for more than 3 months. Let's go general, because there's always that one case, the one that got away, or the scout that we thought was going to be awesome, and we thought that their mom was going to be our next committee chair or whatever. I have that one, right? I don't want to get into that. Let's go 30,000 foot view. To review briefly, our motto from last month is recruit or die. And I know that some of our troops aren't facing this quite as starkly as others, but there are troops that are in the single digits right now. And there are packs that are in single digits right now in terms of youth membership, and they used to be in the 30s or 40s. We are facing an inflection point right now where it is challenging. We have to recruit, and this is timely because Once you recruit them, you need to keep them. So an overview of that. So I just want to put that out there and say, it's not just a matter of getting them in and getting the youth application. It's, you got to keep them, right? My take on this: retention efforts begin the moment that we receive a youth application. And we'll talk about whether that's at a crossover or a bridging ceremony, or if that's at a troop meeting or whatever, right? That's when it begins. Anything before that is essentially recruitment. You're trying to get that young man or young woman to say, yes, I want to be a scout, right? As soon as the youth application is in and signed by the parent, guardian, whoever, then your job is to keep them and keep them interested and engaged in your program. Most importantly, and this should be no news to anybody here, is to make sure that that new scout feels welcomed. Most of the troops that I work with have some sort of I call it a new scout package or a care package. When a new scout joins, often they'll be gifted a Scouts BSA handbook and maybe some patches. My troop has a custom patch number thing that's kind of cool, stuff like that. I want to remind everyone to make sure that you're giving out the current edition of the Scouts BSA handbook. I know that sounds really rudimentary. I'm not going to give some scout a 10-year-old handbook, but it's important. And it's also important to recognize, if you're not familiar, that there are two versions of the handbook. There is one for young men and one for young women. And if you happen to stumble across the young men's one and you give it to a young lady, they might be kind of, well, this is weird. Everybody else in my troop, the other girls, have this other one. Hopefully that never happens, but the content is the same, the images are different, and that's done for a reason. So let's honor that. Depending on the size of your troop, it is really important to get that scout into a patrol. And this is making sure that your new scout feels like they belong. And first and foremost, we belong to a troop, sure, but it's much easier to wrap your brain around being a member of a patrol, right? That smaller team that you're going to get to know. Make sure that you get that new scout started on advancement. I've seen scouts that have been around in a troop for 6, 7, 8 months, and they're still not finished with scout. That's challenging, right? And yes, at the troop level, the tradition is that advancement should be at the scout's pace and it should be youth driven. I completely agree with that. I hope everyone here does too, right? We want to make sure the scout is the one driving the advancement progress. Cub Scouts, totally different, but here at troop level, as long as they have the opportunities, they should be the one driving how fast they're going. And we'll talk about opportunities here in a minute or two. And the thing that really drives me nuts, I've seen this for the past 8 years, when a scout submits an application and that application goes in someone's briefcase, in a drawer, on the bottom of their car floor, and gets forgotten. Get the application to council, please. Yes, you can use digital applications. We'll talk about this in a minute. When a scout comes from a Cub Scout pack, it's technically a transfer, which doesn't work super well with the digital application thing. When you have a scout that is not currently registered with BSA, it's easier to do. And I know it sounds weird, but run with me on this one. I'll explain more later. So please don't let those applications sit in a drawer, sit on the floor of your car, or anything like that. Questions at this point before I move on? Everybody on board with me? Can I get a thumbs up, Ajit? All right, we're moving on. So I broke these things into 3 parts. Part 1 is that Webelos to Scout transition. And I said before, the welcoming, the onboarding, the retention effort starts when you receive a youth application. And with this, it really does start at the crossover, at the bridging, right? That's when the scout is, in theory, officially becoming a member of your troop. And hopefully they are able to give you a youth application at that point in time, or maybe the next nearest troop meeting right after their crossover ceremony. That's when it begins. And that's what I was talking about in terms of that new scout care package. Make sure you have maybe you have a troop t-shirt, maybe you have a neckerchief or something like that with a slide. You have the Scouts BSA handbook, and you make a big deal about welcoming those Scouts. I think I've seen a lot of you at crossovers over the past years. I've seen a lot of perfectly good welcomings from troops to Scouts, making it exciting, making it interesting, making them feel very welcome. And that's really important. It's that first real tangible contact with, okay, now I'm a troop member. Also recognize that a Cub Scout crossing over and becoming a troop member, it can be a stressful transition. It was for me, actually. It was for me for a couple of reasons. One was back in my day, 30 some odd years ago, we didn't cross over till June. And then my troop went to summer camp literally a week and a half later, and I had no idea what I was doing. I went to summer camp I hadn't even earned Scout yet. And I look at some of the Scouts that come into my troop that my boys are in, and I see a little bit of that, right? And it usually eases the stress when they have friends, when they come in with at least some Scouts from their den, but it's worth keeping an eye on those new Scouts and making sure that they're not standing in the corner being afraid to join in. They're not ignored or ostracized in any way, or ostracizing themselves because they don't feel like they're quite ready yet. And there are some great ways to make sure we integrate those Scouts into our program. And I'll get to one in just a minute. I talked about advancement. I want to make sure that everyone's thinking about giving our newest Scouts opportunities to advance on a regular basis. And again, we offer them the opportunity and say, hey, we're going to go work on, tenderfoot requirement, whatever, or tote and chip or whatever it is. Don't you want to come do that? A great example of that, I think a lot of our troops have a tradition about this time of year to have that first new Scout outing. And one of the things that I know a lot of our troops do is we bring the axe, the saw, the knife sharpening kit, and we make sure everybody has that chance to earn the tote and chip, right? Because, hey, then you can carry your pocket knife. And that's something that's important to these young men and women, to be able to carry a pocket knife. And to continue on that, to give them those opportunities and to match the motivation that the youth has in earning their rank advancement. I've seen some Scouts come in, I kid you not, like a rocket, just ready to earn Eagle as soon as possible. Yes, some of those burn out quickly, but some of them keep going. And then you have other Scouts that are just kind of lazily wandering along the path and trying to figure out what they want to do. And neither one is the wrong answer, as long as they're the ones that are deciding that's the pace they want to go. Pardon me. I'm going to say this multiple times, so I hope you get used to it. Getting those new Scouts to summer camp is absolutely critical, because Scouts BSA summer camp is the keystone experience for a new youth who has never been to summer camp or has just been to something like Butte Creek or Camp Clark. And those are great camps, but going as a troop member is an entirely different experience, right? You get to choose everything that you do. You get to choose your own merit badges. You have a lot more freedom. You get to spend time with your friends more. So it's worth making sure that, even if you have a reservation at, Camp Pioneer right now, and you think you're going to get 3 new Scouts, it's okay to make sure there's space for 4 or 5, just in case you get a few extra. Please get those. And as soon as they get in, talk to those parents, grandparents, guardians, whoever they are. This is the week we're going to summer camp. Does that work for you? Make sure we get it down on your calendar. We've already got a spot for your young man, your young woman. We want to make sure that they have a chance to go, because this is the key to them coming back from that experience absolutely invigorated, excited, and ready to move on to that next thing, to do the next awesome stuff, which is usually advancement and the next camp out and all those things. Now, let me take a quick drink here. A lot of you probably already know this, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it. Because your Scouts are at this level, coming from a pack, are usually pretty excited. Yeah, they can be nervous. They can be a little stressed out, whether they realize it or not, but they're ready to go. They're ready for that next adventure. I have found, and maybe it's because I served as a committee chair for my troop, but I have found that some of the biggest challenges can be onboarding adults. Does anybody else have this challenge? You get that den leader. Yeah, okay, Joe's seen it, I'm sure. You get that den leader that crossed over their Arrow of Light Scouts, and they just want to get right in there and help, right? Hold on, right? You got to convince them to take a step back, to be a parent, not be a den leader at this event, because this is supposed to be for the scout to decide what they're going to do, right? And this depends on your troop. A lot of troops I know have a sort of unwritten guideline of when your oldest especially crosses over, take a year off. You're no longer a cub master or a den leader here. You get to be a parent for a year, and that's not a bad policy, whether it's written or unwritten, to give those adults a chance to sort of unwind from the very intense experience that is Cub Scouting, right? You're also going to need to go over how Scouts BSA is different than Cub Scouting. And one of the big ones is advancement. I've seen more than a couple adults, and I'm sure all of you have too, that expect advancement to go in lockstep, very much like the Cub Scouting program. And trying to convince those folks that, hey, look, maybe your scout isn't quite ready for earning first class within 3 months. All right, it's going to be a stretch. If they want to do it, they can get there, but it's up to them. And our outings work differently. Our troop meetings work differently. This is a youth-led program. All those things that we viscerally know because we're in the troop program, and a lot of us come from Cub Scouting volunteer experiences. But let them know that it's different, right? And for a parent of a Cub Scout that transitions in, depending on the size of your troop and how much bureaucracy, if you will, or policies you have, you might be able to onboard a new family in 45 minutes. Here's how fundraising works. Here's how much it costs. Advancements like this. Can we go camping once a month? Camping costs about this much. Yeah, if you want to go camping, you have to have youth protection, blah, 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 blah. And you could be done in 45 minutes. It might take days, multiple meetings with different things going over the budget and going over, depending on how your troop works. And this is where the welcome wagon can come in, something like a new member coordinator or just a committee member who is the welcome wagon, as I like to call them, to sit those new families down and say, hey, here's how this works. Because those families are going to sort of be like, oh, this is a new thing, right? Yeah, it's most important to let them know how your troop works. How do the finances work? Do you use scout accounts? How does that work? How does the fundraising work with that? How do the meetings work? Do you want the parents to stick around? With the fact that we've been in a pandemic for the past 2 years, that's probably different than it has been in the past, right? How much involvement do you expect? I know there's more than one troop in our area that essentially requires every family that is involved to have somebody be a committee member of some way, shape, or form. And that has to be explained. Is there some other thing there? So that's another aspect, right? Getting those families on board, making sure they understand what's going on. Do they have a calendar of all of the upcoming events? I talked last month about how a troop calendar is really critical in recruiting scouts. Oh, Tom's in the waiting area. Thank you, Ajit, for mentioning that. I will tell Pete. I'll have to edit this out of the video. Tom Wessel is in the waiting area. Comma, can you let him in? Question mark. Hopefully he'll be able to get back in. So we have a challenge with onboarding all of our families and making sure that our scouts are in a patrol, they're comfortable, they're ready to go, and they understand that being a troop member is different than being a Cub Scout, right? And one of the things that I want to encourage everyone to think about how this can work in your troop and really facilitate, especially the youth, feeling like they're a part of this troop and feeling like they're making some achievements and some advancements, is making sure that you have a troop guide of some kind. I talked last month about how a den chief can be integral in maintaining the conduit between one or more packs that you recruit from and your troop. In the same way, a good troop guide can really help with retention. And this is going to work differently depending on how your troops patrols, the size of your troop, how your patrol structure works, all that kind of stuff, right? But fundamentally, find that experienced scout You're usually older, but I'm going to go ahead and say experienced. The minimum requirement is first class in theory, according to BSA National. And try to convince them that they are the best person to be the mentor for the new scouts. Maybe there's one new scout, maybe there's 12. Maybe if there's more than 12, you need more than one troop guide. I don't know. And there's no requirement on, oh, you must only have one troop guide. You can have as many as you want, right? But this is a great way to formalize that mentorship process. And the way that I sell being a troop guide to youth members is very simple. It's two things. One, your job, your only job, is to teach these first year scouts, the new scouts, everything you can about the scouting, about what they need to know to be a scout. If they get to first class in 12 months, that's awesome. If they don't, fine. But then number two, and this worked really well about 3 years ago. I was trying to convince a young man that he would be a great troop guide. Turns out he is. And he was kind of on the fence about it. And I told him, I said, his name was Nathan. His name is Nathan. I said, Nathan, I'm not sure if you think about this, but this is the way that you leave a legacy here at this troop, is you buy into the fact that you are the mentor and you are the teacher for the next generation. And that got him. And so I encourage you to use that legacy idea of, this is how you leave something behind when you're 16, 17, and you know that you're going to be transitioning out. You also, as a scoutmaster, you want to find that scout not only that's first class, not only that really understands all of those trail to first class requirements as best they can, but also really does work well with the younger scouts. If there are always youth in our troops that just don't buy into the idea of being a mentor, and they're not going to fit very well into this program. Very much like a den chief, a troop guide is not an elected or voted on position. This is not senior patrol leader or patrol leader. This is something that the scoutmaster should ask of a scout. Would you be willing to do this? I think you would be awesome. Would you like to leave a legacy behind? Okay. My summary for this part: transitioning Webelos into your troop, welcoming the new scout, onboarding the family, get that scout to camp, and get the scout moving on advancement. And that last part filters directly into the troop guide, because that's a lot of what they do, is encouraging scouts on advancement. Those are the 4 pieces of the puzzle. Any questions at this point before I move on, or concerns or thoughts before I transition into scouts that were not Cub Scouts? No. Joe, what do you think?
It's all cut and dry.
Okay. I'm preaching to the choir here. All right. So with that, I'm going to transition to the next one. And it's going to look similar but different. So for those scouts that we have coming in, and maybe we did a really successful friend storming activity. We got a few of our current scouts' friends decided they wanted to join. Great. How is that different? Well, welcoming, again, starts when a youth application is received. And it's important to recognize, if we're getting a scout in that was not a Cub Scout, that they may have visited a whole bunch of different times. They may have come to a couple of troop meetings, they may have come to a camp out before they finally make that decision. That's okay. Officially speaking, until they give you a youth application that's signed, they're not working on advancement, which is kind of a bum deal, right? If they went on a camp out and they did all the tote and chip requirements, in theory, if they haven't turned in a youth application, then that doesn't count. Now, if they did, or maybe if mom or dad or grandpa fills in the date a few weeks before, you can work with that. I'm not going to tell you to do it or not do it, but just know that everything starts the moment that the youth application is received. Again, please make sure that those get into council and not in a drawer in a briefcase on the floor of your car. One of the things I've seen with this flavor of new scout in a troop is that often they will have a friend in the troop, and with something like that, I really like to see them paired up with that friend, at least for a while, in the same patrol or in the same grouping or whatever. If you're a smaller troop, then you're all one patrol, or if you have a big troop, then you have lots of patrols. Make sure that scout has their friend close to them for the first, 6 months at least, I'd say. And if not, maybe it's somebody who we had one of these in our my elites troop with the girls. A young lady that decided she just wanted to join Scouts, and her dad was an Eagle Scout, and they'd moved in from Colorado, and she knew nobody. So my recommendation in that kind of a situation is make sure to find them a buddy, not necessarily a troop guide situation, but maybe a troop friend, somebody to gently instruct them on the details, because they're not going to know the Scout sign, the Scout law, the oath, all the things. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that our Cub Scouts already know, having come up through the Cub Scouting program, right? And anybody coming in from not having that experience, that was not a Cub Scout or not currently a Scout, they're not going to know that. So having somebody be that Scout's buddy is a great option. Again, I'm going to say this, summer camp attendance is still key. And if you bring those Scouts in this time of year, it's a great time to get them to summer camp. You're probably going to need to do more explanation of the scouting program and your troop to the family and possibly that Scout than you would with, somebody a family that came from a Cub Scout pack. You can explain to a lot of Cub Scout families, oh yeah, we do fundraising, we do popcorn, we do candy beef, and 50% goes to the Scout account, and 90% of your Cub Scout families are going to know exactly what you're talking about. Somebody who has no history with scouting is going to be lost. You're going to have to sit them down for a longer conversation. Okay, here's what this is. And yes, we go camping once a month. Okay, you don't have gear yet. Well, I can help you with that or whatever. Here's what a Scout account is. Do you do it? Do you not do it? Well, here's how fundraising works. It's going to take more time, but that's okay. Just have that person available to answer the questions. And I have been accused, I'll claim to be guilty on this, of opening up the fire hose far too much and giving people way too much information in a very short period of time because I want everybody to have everything, right? With something like this, I would encourage everyone to be available to answer questions, but not to shove as much information as you can at people. And, folks that have a youth that come in from not being members, they may not know what they don't know yet. So it might take some time. Explain in as much detail as they need. Whether or not to incorporate them in the troop guide process is up to how your troop works and your best judgment. And I'll give you two examples. I served as troop guide when I was, I think, 13. When I was a youth, I want to say 11 Scouts. And I thought at the time that they all came from the same pack, probably the same 2 dens within that pack, way back in the day. And it turns out, most of those Scouts continued on. A lot of them actually ended up earning Eagle Scout. I keep in touch with them. And I learned later that one of them had never been a Cub Scout. He just joined with his buddies as they crossed over into a troop. And it may have been that he discovered scouting and wanted to join as a 5th grader. And they said, wait until the troop and then you can join. And that's how we had to do it then, because you couldn't just earn Arrow of Light. I didn't know any different, and neither did he. I think he was just along for the ride all of a sudden. It made sense to slide him into, we used the new Scout Patrol method with that troop, and I was their troop guide for a whole year, and it just made sense, right? Complementary to that, a friend of mine joined my troop a couple years later. He was 15 at the time. It would not make sense to put him in with the 11-year-olds. And so you're going to go learn all the things with the 11-year-olds. That's going to make them feel like they're in kindergarten again. And it just doesn't make any sense. So there's a certain amount of judgment that has to be, taken on by the Scoutmaster or whoever is assigning your patrols. Where do we put the Scout, and how do we make sure that they get onboarded and they have those opportunities, right? It's all about the advancement opportunities. Your Scout that has not been a member of a BSA unit before may not be quite as motivated for advancement immediately. They might be, they might not be, but make sure they have those opportunities and all that kind of good stuff. So those 4 points remain the same, but how we go about looking at it and the specific challenges are slightly different, right? So it's worth thinking about where the Scouts are coming from and what they might need. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop for just a second and ask if there are any other questions, concerns. This all makes sense? Am I just, okay, getting a few nods? Feel free to chime in if you have questions, concerns, or if you need greater depth.
I think I bumped into almost every issue that you came up with.
It happens over time, right? You see all these things. And a lot of times there aren't right or wrong answers. It's what's the best we can do right now, you know? So.
For me, the part that we're working on right now is the parents are interested, excited with their new kid. We're mostly in the second category where the kids have not done much scouting before. And so just getting them up to speed. So we've had the sit down meeting with the parents, like, this is Scout Book, this is scoutcommunity.com, this is, this is how the troop works, this is how, this is what America badge, kind of basically like the Scout badge for parents. So we've done that. I don't know. The part that we're having a hard time with is they want this for the kid. We're still trying to get them to, like, they'll show up to a patrol meeting or whatever, but when they get really uncomfortable when we talk to them, like, hey, actually, we need a treasurer, or hey, we need a blank. What are there tips for helping them not be so scared that we're asking them to do a part-time job that's going to suck up the rest of their so-called life?
Yeah, let me come back to that, because that's a little bit different than what I wanted to cover today. But I think
you're right. I forgot. You're right.
No, it's okay. Let's say that for the end, because I do have some ideas, and I actually had a whole presentation. I think Joe might have seen it before, about how to recruit adult volunteers, and this was 3 or 4 years ago. I can give you a couple of very distinct points before we go. Don't let me forget. Okay. Anybody else? Questions or thoughts before I move on? Go ahead and advance my slides real quick. Okay. So I promise I don't have very many slides left, and I will open it up to stories and commentary, and we can address Lincoln's thoughts here. So one thing I want to mention to everyone, and a lot of you have probably already seen this, whether you've been to leadership training for your work or for Wood Badge or whatever, that there are stages of team development. We go over this in ILST. Is that the right? I think that's the right acronym. Your skills for leadership. Yeah, ILST. A new scout in any patrol, or if you have a small troop, 12 or below, it's going to affect the entire troop. It's potentially going to change the dynamics of that group, right? And adding or subtracting any scouts is going to just change the way that they work. And this is kind of what we do, right? I know every troop, almost by definition, does patrols differently. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you should be doing patrols this way. Whatever works for your troop is great. Don't let me tell you not to, but watch for those changes from stages. If you've got a patrol and they were performing, and you've got a couple new scouts in there, and they're all of a sudden back to bickering a little bit and storming, that's okay. Keep an eye on that. Maybe they'll come back around and re-norm and get back to performing in it for a few months. It might take some time, and a couple of campouts and a couple of failed duty rosters, right? But keep an eye on that. There's a big difference between that and actual personality, challenges, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I am personally a big fan of the new Scout Patrol, and using that is going to have a different set of challenges as opposed to all mixed age. Or I know there's one troop that's in a different district nearby that has every patrol is a single age. You join as an 11-year-old, and you join that patrol, and your patrol marches its way up until you turn 18, and then the patrol goes away. And that's a totally different way to do that, right? I kind of like a hybrid approach, where you bring those new scouts together. They have a troop guide. They learn things for 3, 6, maybe 12 months, and then they're dispersed into mixed age patrols. Your results will be different based on how you do that and how your troop functions, right? And again, if you're a smaller troop, it's going to affect everybody, because if there's 11 scouts and you bring in 3, that's a big percentage of change, right? So it's worth knowing that. So again, my most important point is do what works for your troop. And I will also say this: don't feel like you have to stick with what you've been doing as a troop. The worst excuse I've ever heard is, we're doing that because it's the way we've always done it. Not the right answer. If you think that a different method is going to yield better results, try it. It's okay. It's okay to try something and fail and go back to what worked before, I feel. So keep an eye out for those stages when you have new scouts come in. One of the things I also want to mention is, and this is true across the board for new scouts, your program, your troops program absolutely matters. The first few campouts, the first few months of membership within your troop is, in my opinion, fairly crucial. Having those regular meetings that are not lectures, that's not, another hour of school at the end of the day on Monday or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. It's engaging, it's tactile, it's physical. There's a game. They get to meet the other scouts. That's what you want. If your troop isn't camping on a very regular basis, then it's very likely that the scouts are going to wonder why not. If at least every month they're giving an opportunity to go camping and do something interesting. And interesting could be simple. It could be, car camping, or it could be backpacking. It could be anything. It's just the fact of getting out there and doing the thing, because this is an outdoor program, right? And the next 2 points speak to an experience I had with the Cub Scout as a Cub Scout volunteer. There's a debate as to whether if you get a whole bunch of new scouts this time of year, let's say you get like, I don't know, half a dozen new Cub Scouts that join your troop, right? Or Cub Scouts that join your troop and cross over. Is it better to have in the first few weeks a service project, or a really exciting adventure, like let's go to Wings and Waves and spend a day on the water slide? My pack used to do fall recruitment. It was our big thing. And we always tried to plan a big adventure. One of the biggest ones we did was we did an overnighter with the Oregon Coast Aquarium down there in November. It was November, down in Newport. Fantastic program. It was indoors. We got to sleep in the tubes under the fish. It was awesome. And we saw good retention that year. There's I don't know if I'd say it's a complementary theory that having a meaningful, not trivial, but accessible service project within the first month and a half of a scout joining is an even better way to get scouts to stick around a little bit longer. And the theory behind that is very simple. Now they have skin in the game. They have put some effort into this thing that is your troop. And, I'm going to stick around because I don't want to waste that time, right? Maybe both. I don't know. I'd like to see some big adventure. Take your troop over to Smith Rock and go rock climbing if you feel comfortable doing that, or some bigger adventure. Backpacking is tough with 11-year-olds because they may not have the gear, right? But there are some bigger things that we can do. You could take your troop to the USS Blueback down there at OMSI and camp over, sleep overnight in the submarine if you want. That's different. I've done that with a Cub Scout pack. I can tell you more about that later. And again, summer camp, absolutely crucial. Your program should include summer camp or some high adventure or something. With brand new scouts that come in, high adventure is challenging in many levels, but if it works, go for it. If your program is lackluster, you're going to have a harder time keeping your scouts engaged. That is the takeaway from this. And it goes right alongside my statement last month of when you're recruiting a new scout, then one of the most powerful things you can do is hand that scout and or their family a 12-month calendar and say, here's what we're doing for the next 12 months. We'd love to have you join us. And then implement the program that's on that calendar. That's how we do this, right? A couple warning signs to look out for: scouts that are not engaged in meetings. I've seen this. This is sad. A scout that isn't fully engaged. There is an exception to that, in my opinion, if Tommy Tenderfoot is also super engaged with a sport or another activity. Whether a good example would be baseball, right? And if a scout is 100% committed to their baseball team, you're going to lose that scout from about mid-March to mid-June, roughly, right? Okay, we know that up front. That's cool. We'll see you in mid-June. We'll save you a spot for summer camp. That's the way to handle that. And then when they come back around, they're going to re-engage, because baseball doesn't last forever. The same thing is true with football or soccer or basketball or taekwondo. Taekwondo is all year round usually, but there are other ways and there are other things, right? A lot of sports are seasonal. So it's definitely worth working with a family, working with the scout to make sure that if they want to do a sport, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from being a scout. Watch out for youth that appear to be ostracized if they're not gelling with their scouts, with their patrol. again, I've seen this, and it's sad. And it wasn't that the scouts were being mean to this person. It just wasn't working out. And then maybe try a different patrol, different something. Scouts that aren't taking advantage of advancement opportunities. And again, I have a long-term view on this. If it's the fourth time that you have offered as a troop the tote and chip, and this one scout just, nah, I'm good. What's going on? Are you afraid of the knife? Is the axe too much? I don't know. Ask those questions, right? I've seen scouts that appear to be driven to scouting by their parent or grandparent, and they're not super engaged. Maybe ask the question, is there something we can do to get the scout more excited about being here? Can we ask mom or dad or grandpa or whatever to back off a little bit so the scout feels like they can have more buy-in, more agency in their scouting experience, and they're not being shoved by somebody else. Keep an eye out for bullying behavior. It happens. It's less likely to happen now than it was 30 years ago, but it can still happen. Whether that scout is the bully or the one being bullied, either way, neither is acceptable. And again, did the scout attend summer camp? If not, I'm going to say red flag. So those are warning signs, in my opinion. It's pretty straightforward, I think. And there are probably more that I'm missing, and maybe you guys can help me fill in the list here. The other thing I wanted to encourage everyone to do is to take some time on a regular basis to reflect. And this is really good if you take attendance at troop meetings, if you take attendance at campouts. Hopefully you have some sort of record of who went to each campout. Look back on a regular basis. I'd say at least every 6 months, and which scouts are engaged. What does their overall attendance look like? Are they working on advancement? Maybe they didn't finish tenderfoot, but they've got a whole bunch of stuff. They've been working on tenderfoot and second and first class, and it's filling in as they go. And they're going to hit tenderfoot, and 9 days later they'll be second class, and 9 days later they'll be first. That's fine. That can happen, right? But if they're not working on stuff, they're not getting things signed off, they're not engaging with advancement, that's worth asking why. Reach out and ask questions, especially of the scout and the family. Another good example is if a scout can't make a meeting because of transportation challenges. Okay, can we find a way to get you a ride to the troop meeting? If mom, dad, or grandma and grandpa, your guardian, can't get you here, how can we facilitate that, right? That happens sometimes. And don't feel like this is on one person's shoulders, whether that's the scoutmaster, the committee chair, the membership chair. Work with your volunteer leadership team to try to figure out how we can solve these challenges, right? Many hands make light work and all of those things. Okay, that's my pitch. Learning objectives. We talked about new members from a pack. We talked about new members that are not registered, and we kind of went big picture and went general best practices. Those are my thoughts, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up to thoughts, comments, questions, or anything else. We'll cover Lincoln's ask in just a second. Anybody want to talk about retention challenges in their troop and things that worked or didn't work? Everybody's very quiet.
Well, when it comes to something like another sport, baseball or gymnastics, there's really not much you can do about that, because that's really that's what the scout wants. So we've lost a lot of people to that.
Yeah, I agree. I also will say there are some things, and Taekwondo is one of them, that are year round, and it's harder to make that. But with something like baseball, usually it's a specific season. And so I try to come at the scout and discuss that with the parents and say, hey, look, we understand that your scout is going to be playing baseball for 3-4 months. That's cool. Come on back when you're done. So Joe, you're saying that hasn't worked for your troop?
No, we've lost to baseball, swimming, gymnastics, and it's the scout just wants to focus on that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we found with the. So there was a membership thing I went to about 7 years ago about, and this was specifically to Cub Scouting, but I think it fits into what Joe's mentioning here. It was all about the millennial parent. which I think now is what, going to be in their early 30s on average. Is that about right? Early to mid 30s if you're a millennial. And the big differentiator between somebody my age who's a parent in their 40s and a younger one is that the younger generation has a tendency to not want to have their youth be doing 20 different things in a week, right? I think that's what you're talking about, Joe, is whether it's the youth or the adults, they don't want to try to do 5 things. They want to do 1 thing, maybe 2. And I think the challenge then is how to convince them that scouting is really should be one of those 2 things. The thing that I would use for what it's worth, Joe, are you familiar with the Tufts video, the 90-second video from Tufts University?
I don't believe I've seen that.
Anybody else? No? Okay. And so this is something that Pat had to drop off. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. I wonder, where do I have it? I'm going to see if I can find it. I got 2 things to do. Okay. Because it's something that I've used for a couple of years when recruiting Cub Scouts, which I actually haven't recruited Cub Scouts for about 1.5 years now. But it's really good because it's 90 seconds long. It's like 92 seconds. And it basically lines out why scouting is important, what this is all about in terms of, leadership and character development. But it also says in very plain, simple terms, you can do sports and scouting and they're good complements to each other. And I wonder if something like that would be really valuable for any parent or scout that's kind of facing that, right? So let me see if I can find that. And then I'll also, Lincoln wanted to talk about recruiting.
While Mike's looking that up, Joe, something we did with ours. So we had a kid who did baseball, and all of a sudden his dad, who's one of the best supportive parents to the program, was just gone. And that was not good for me. So we planned a couple of activities at their house where we knew, hey, you're going to be here on Saturday. How about we do, like we set up with the kids working on the pioneering merit badge, and they happened to have a barn. So we built the structure in the barn. And
that's cool.
So we found ways to make sure that they didn't feel totally disconnected over the, whatever it was, like 2 months, 3 months long, whatever the season was. So that 3 weeks ago when his season got over, he was there first week. And I'd like to think that some of that played a part, because the dad was more than happy to just be like, yeah, we'll see you in 3 months. And I was like, that didn't make me feel too good. But anyway, that was something we tried, and he's still there. So that's an N of 1. I don't know if that would work for anybody else, but that's something we tried, and it seemed to help.
That's a really good example of just going a little bit, that one extra step. How can we fill in that gap and find a time that we can do something to keep your scout engaged? I like that. That's really good.
I do like that idea, because instead of them coming to scouts, we're bringing scouts to them. So it like takes something off their plate.
It really was not intrusive to them. They were happy to do it. It's not like they don't like scouts. They just are like, hey, you know what? If you want to come on a Saturday morning and do a bunch of knots in the barn and bring a merit badge counselor, great. We can kick the kid out of the house and he will show up, right? I mean, it was fine.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I found the video. I had to find a way to plug in my flash drive that's almost broken. Let me go full screen. And okay, let me see if I can get this to work.
Everyone knows a goal of scouting is to prepare young people to succeed in life. But is it working? What if we can understand just how effective scouting is in shaping young minds?
Thanks to the John Templeton Foundation, the BSA was able to partner with Dr. Richard Lerner and his team from Tufts University to follow nearly 1,800 Cub Scouts for 3 years and compare them to nearly 400 boys of similar backgrounds who are not in Scouts. What they found was remarkable.
Cub Scouts showed significant positive development in attributes of being cheerful, helpful, kind, obedient, trustworthy, and hopeful.
But there were no significant increases in these character attributes among non-Scouts. In fact, Non-Scouts reported decreased scores for the attribute of religious reverence.
Scouts were also more likely than non-Scouts to choose helping others or doing the right thing over being smart, being the best, or playing sports.
What's more, youth who participated in both sports and Scouting were more likely to choose these same values than those who only played sports.
And finally, the study showed that boys who spent more time in Scouting had higher positive character attributes.
Scouting builds positive character and provides young people with a foundation they can stand on to embrace opportunity and overcome obstacles.
With fun and discovery at every turn, Scouting makes the most of right now. Scouting works.
Awesome. So 92 seconds. And yes, it does focus on the Cub Scouting program, and that's where the survey was done essentially. But there's data to back this up. They did this back, I want to say it was about 10 years ago, and it was before we had girls in Scouting. That video was produced before we had girls in our primary programs. So the imagery is a bit old, but I think the core idea is there that Scouting as a program offers more than sports does, but it can work well together. So I don't know if that's something, I always played that for the parents when I essentially started talking about Cub Scouting at like a join night. And I don't know how I would fit it in, what to think about how I would fit it in, if I'd fit it in with some sort of an onboarding thing with new troop members, right? There's a link there in the chat. I think that's the right, let me click on it to make sure it actually goes to the right place. Oh, there's an ad, of course. And you can download it, you can put it on a flash drive like I did, and take it to wherever you need to go, or send them a link to the YouTube thing and say, here's what this is all about. I don't know. That face-to-face conversation is always better, in my opinion, when you're trying to resolve these issues. So, okay. Any other challenges